Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom. Unrelenting focus. This is a trigger warning for anybody listening to today's episode that we will be discussing post-separation abuse. If you are triggered by this at all, please call 13 11 14, or you can call 1-800-RESPECT if you are experiencing any of this and you need help. If you are in immediate danger, of course, always call 000 or the number for the police emergency services in your country. Welcome, Mum.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone.
I already want to cry because I just feel horrible for these people, but let's get into it. Now, Mum, we've found this thing called the Purple Book.
Yes.
And it is something that has been produced by the Domestic Abuse Interventions Program, and it's using the Duluth model. If you want to find out more about that, we will put that in the show notes. This book has been produced by Domestic Violence Prevention Centre Gold Coast.
Thank you for that. That's lovely.
A disclaimer that they don't accept any responsibility for anybody who suffers any risks or consequences from relying on this information, and neither do we, but I think it's important. And if you have not read the Purple Book, you can find it on the website. So we will put that in the show notes as well.
Let's do that. Yeah.
But thank you to the government for helping post this out, and thank you for the Duluth model that has helped raise this. Now, we also get a lot of emails from our male listeners, and thank you to our male listeners for the listening and the respect and the comments that we receive from you saying that you enjoy our episodes. But we are going to point out that this is predominantly post-separation abuse is directed towards women. In saying that, we do know people, males, who have experienced post-separation abuse from their female partner. And we're very aware of the post-separation abuse that does occur also between the LGBTQI plus community. So apologies if any of our terms of references of gender offends anyone. We're following the post-separation power and control wheel that is in the Purple Book. So, Mum, we're going to share this information, and I think it's important that we talk about it. Yes. And I know we can't solve anybody's problems, but we can be there to talk you through what you might not realize is happening to you and what you may start to identify as a pattern. So, Mum, this wheel, if people want to download it, they can have a look. But it says prior physical, sexual violence, coercive, controlling behavior against the mother and the children. That's what's happened before, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a circle inside it that just says unrelenting focus on her.
I don't think I've ever heard that described so well.
Yes. That does seem like an unrelenting focus on her. And I know so many of you've written in and just feel like you are on this never ending treadmill, legal, emotional, psychological stuff you've got to deal with, a part-time job, a full-time job of dealing with this. So there are different sections in this, and we're going to try and talk about as many as we can in this one. But starting with, so I'm just going to read them all out, and then we're going to talk about each one separately. Okay. So undermining her ability to parent. The other one is discrediting her as a mother or a father. The next one is withholding financial support. The next one is endangering children. The next one is disregarding children. The next one is disrupting her relationships with children. The next one is using physical and sexual violence against the mother and the children. And the next one is using harassment and intimidation. So let's get talking about each one of these. Again, please call 13 11 14 if you're feeling triggered, and definitely call 1-800-RESPECT if this is a problem for you. But let's start with undermining her ability to parent. So it says disrupting children's sleep, feeding patterns, withholding information about children's social, emotional, physical needs, contradicting her rules for the children, and demanding visitation schedules at children's expense. What does that mean, Mum?
I think that this was a much bigger issue over the last 17 years than it will be in the future. But it is exhausting for someone who's coming out of usually a lengthy abusive relationship. So those behaviors are still there. That fight or flight sort of reaction is still, a person might accept that controlling behavior because that's what it was before. And gradually, to the detriment of the kids, they can, in the pursuit of 50-50 shared time or whatever they're trying to do, getting 100% custody of the kids, they will sacrifice the children's schedules and things. And you hear that. And I did hear of a particular judicial officer who thought that the children being weaned, or the child being weaned as soon as possible, was a solution to spending more time with the father.
Oh my goodness. Does the court recognise, for example, we do hear of those parents who they're giving the children back the next day, so they let them stay up until 2 a.m. in the morning. They give them, like sugar and candy and lollies, the typical stereotypical things that you hear about. But also the whole Disneyland kind of behavior where it's fun here, you don't have to do your homework, all that sort of stuff. Does the court recognise any of that?
It does now, I believe. So I believe. Okay. Well, the new legislation's only been out for 3 weeks, but I am convinced that the court has changed the legislation because of this very thing, and if a person, like, before the legislation had a presumption of equal shared time, the rules or the law said the best interests of the child was paramount, and then the court could look at these things to see if that, to decide what is the best interest of the children. What changed and has gone away now was a period of time where there was a presumption of equal shared care, and the court, in my respectful opinion, just swept aside or disregarded these sort of little things, which when you look at that, undermining her ability to parent, I think actually is more like causing harm to the children. It's not undermining ability to parent. Disrupting their sleep and feeding patterns, that's basic care for a child, isn't it?
Now, that on its own doesn't seem so bad. It may seem like you're complaining, oh, the dad let such and such stay up till midnight, or this. But when you look at it as a whole, when this whole circle, when we talk about the whole thing, it makes sense. So I do want to raise with everybody that there is an app. I think it was created in Victoria, and it's called ARC, ARCAPP. That's what you'd search in the Apple App Store. And we are not in any way linked to them. They don't know us. But if you are aware, it's a domestic violence resource where you can start to log these kind of behaviors. You're not telling anyone about it. You're not necessarily doing any of that. But what you can do later is print it out as a report and provide it to a lawyer to show this sort of behavior.
Yes, because when you write down those things, they may seem petty. They may seem really nothing to complain about. But taken all together, you are definitely seeing a continuation of the abuse of the parent. And it's all about, now the court is making it, how do you feel? How did that make you feel? And if it made you feel a certain way, then it can go in ARC. If it made you feel diminished, frightened, bullied, put it in, no matter what minimal thing it was, because I've seen cases where it's just a look. It's just a look, and that's all that's needed.
Yeah, let's go on to that next thing, using harassment and intimidation. So destroying things belonging or related to her or the children, using the children to justify breaking no contact orders, threatening and stalking her or the children, making his presence known whilst staying conspicuously outside the protection boundaries, abusing animals, using third parties to harass, threaten or coerce her. So again, sorry about the language, but it is predominantly women. So Mum, I feel sick just saying that. And I know a lot of people are probably experiencing this. This kind of behavior is hard to show. It's hard to prove. How do you write that? How do you say, so they destroyed, say they came back and the kids had AirPods or the kids had a backpack and the backpack's been broken or ripped up. Every time they go over there, their shoes get ripped. And how do you explain that?
You just say it. You just have to say it, because I think the court, I was listening to a webinar from the court about Lighthouse Project and Everett's List, which if anyone is in the family court will know they will have been given a questionnaire about family violence, and cases that are identified as urgent will go through the Everett List. And the questionnaire is about feelings. So I think we're going to find a lot more openness of the court to infer the violence or coercive control of a woman if it makes her feel terrible. I can see that a lot of people use the children to justify the no contact orders, or they're standing just outside of premises, you know, and abusing animals. It's just, it does count. I mean, courts have now realised, or the law has realised, that abusing an animal is a good indicator of violence going forward.
So this using children to justify breaking no contact orders. Now, I know it's going to be different in every state of Australia and in everywhere in the world. Can you use the children as an excuse to break an order?
If the order says that they're not allowed to contact you except in relation to the children, then I have seen cases where they bombard a woman with emails or texts, and every single one of them mentioned the kids. And so I found myself in court with someone on the other side, and they said, but these are all, Your Honour, he's allowed to do this. This is pursuant to the order. And the judge was inclined to believe that point of view until I was able to, because I'd counted it up and printed it out in hard copy, counted up, and it was 1,500 emails in 30 days. So it's, so even then, that was a couple of years ago, the court would recognise that. And they're pretty quick to realise that there's bullying and so forth going on, and the children are just a byline if that's the way.
So we've got an episode on documentation, so record keeping and the importance of that. And so whilst, again, you may feel silly saying, oh my gosh, he's or she's sent me this message and added the children in at the end to make it seem like it's okay, you can put that in and keep a record of that. You can use the ARC app, and then it'll collate it all for you at the end, and it'll count up how many messages you've got for you. But it's important to protect yourself. If you're experiencing this, you need to be documenting this stuff, because one of the things that happens to people going through this, when you look at this entire wheel, and there's so much to look at, it's so overwhelming just reading it. I can only imagine how overwhelming it would be to live it. And the last thing you're going to be thinking of when you receive an email from them harassing you about something, vaguely pretending it's about the children, is, oh, I better put that, write that down. And so when you do go to the police, if you did go to the police, they're going to say, oh, well, what's the big deal? You're not going to be able to eloquently say it. But if you, like Mum said, have said, well, actually, in the last 30 days, I've received 50 emails, that would make a bigger impact. Is there anything else you want to say about that intimidating and harassment, Mum?
Yeah, there is. I think that there is a trend at the moment of people who are subject to family violence orders using other people to harass the person, you know, who's protected. And it's sometimes it's family trying to recruit family against you. Sometimes it's old friends that might want to catch up for coffee, and then they're lecturing you about what you should do and shouldn't do. But sometimes I'm seeing a trend of complete strangers who just randomly pop up at places. And I think that it's very hard to identify that. But the chances of a person you don't know standing outside your house or waiting at the bus stop and not getting on the buses or whatever it is, the chance of that happening pretty remote if it's a frequent thing. And if it makes you feel scared, you can put it down even if you can't prove that the other person has done it. But if it's made you feel scared, you can set those down, and a long list of them will sort of, it takes it beyond the risk of just an accident or coincidence.
All right, let's talk about this one, discrediting her as a mother. And we've got an episode on protecting yourself against unfair accusations in the family court, and I'll put that in the show notes. But it says using her status against her sexual identity, immigration, race, religion, education, income, inundating systems with false accusations of bad parenting, cheating, using drugs, being, in inverted commas, crazy, exploiting the children, need a father to gain sympathy, isolating her from her family, friends, practitioners, and other supporters. So you've already named it there, Mum, mentioning the family and friends. So there's a big issue there, I guess, because people forget that. I do feel like some people forget, and I'm a mum. And I know you have to continue taking the kids to see the GP. You have to continue to take the kids to go to school. It's not like your life stops. You've got to continue living. And that discrediting, that's something that can continue after separation.
Yeah. And this allegation that you're crazy, getting to people in authority first and trying to line them up onto their side. You often see that.
So what strategies can people put into place, Mum, to protect themselves from that?
It's very hard. And I mean, people are quite gullible, and it is the case that sometimes people in authority will take the side of the person who's most forceful. And of course they can say you're crazy and poison the well, so to speak. So by the time you get there, they're looking at you going, oh yes. And then anything you say plays into their narrative by accident. One thing that's not mentioned there that I wish was mentioned there is that if you've been in a close relationship with someone and you thought that was forever, and you've told them things that happened to you as a child or your childhood things, it is awful to see the way that people will exploit that, put it in material, tell everyone else. And I've seen one, I'm going to tell your mother you're gay if you don't do this, this and this, all sorts of things. So it's also using against you the stuff they've learnt about your past related. So they might say, oh, she was from a broken home, therefore she can't parent properly. Or she was sexually abused as a child, she's at risk now.
Yeah, and it makes sense if you're coming out of a coercive controlling or, a domestic family violence situation, you're probably not going to be in your best headspace. And you may come across disheveled or, nervous, anxious, and they may try and point to that as some sort of example of you being crazy. So Mum, really this discrediting situation that happens, and it generally they're usually trying to do it in court as well, are they not? And it's to try and say, well, look how crazy this person is.
Yeah, dogment to Centrelink. All those things, just throwing things from outside into their lives, making an impact, making you feel their presence.
So your best defense for that is to keep emotionally strong.
If you can, get some counselling. Back up what you're saying with documentation. And I know in the early days, particularly if you haven't yet been to court, that sometimes their lies seem to be winning against your truth. And it's only in court when they're being cross-examined that their real true self comes out. I mean, good, manipulative and controlling people, like the ones who do it very, very well, have done it all of your relationship and will not stop just because you're separated. And they know your Achilles heel is the kids usually, and they're happy to sort of, I guess, spoil what the children want in order to hurt you. But this stuff I think it's going to be better.
Why?
Because the court has gone back to the way the law was before 2006. And in that case, 2006, before then, the court could just have a look at all of the factors about the interests of the children. And the kids can talk now, or must talk actually, to the ICL, independent children's lawyer, unless they're under 5. The independent children's lawyer should talk to them and should make the kids' wishes known to the court. So, those sort of things, the kids can properly relay what's going on in the world rather than having to pay for a family report. So I think gradually the law is much closer to what it was back then. And we really did look at the status quo of the children, who's been the primary carer of the children. And unlike the old law, the court is not inclined to suddenly change everything just to be fair to the other parent.
Talking about fairness, another wedge in this wheel is withholding financial support. So it says withholding child support, insurance, medical, basic expense payments, using court action to take her money and resources, interfering with her ability to work, and blocking access to money after separation. Now, it's really interesting at the moment. Child support seems to be a big issue anywhere in the world, but there just recently has been a research by the Women's Legal Services Australia. They published a report that they think that withholding child support is a tool of economic violence against women. And it states that although there's $2 billion in child support owed nationally in Australia, those who withhold face hardly any consequences, and it is still not recognised by Australian government agencies and financial institutions as a form of financial abuse. Their research also showed 85% of single parents and carers in Australia are women, and the report notes that the current system has many loopholes and flaws that allow the power dynamics to be upheld and men's financial interests to be elevated. So they are asking the government for urgent reforms to help. And I know that current government has mentioned that they're looking into reforms for child support, but that withholding financial support, what can people do about it? What can a listener do who's maybe their ex is in like $20,000 child support arrears, or they have to go and take their child to do something and they ask their ex for money and they're like, no. What can they do, Mum?
It's very hard, isn't it? We have a situation in Australia still where, as far as I know, the banks, when they're working at borrowing capacity for a woman, will not take into account any child support she's supposed to receive because they don't expect it'll always be paid. But then on the other hand, if a person is applying for a mortgage and it's the person who pays child support, they will put child support in as an expense of theirs. But what's happening is there's money not finding its way over, $2 billion not finding its way to the kids. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. With child support, you can apply in Australia for a review of child support, look carefully at the grounds. It is something I know that's tricky, and you've got to grit your teeth, but have a look and see if they're manoeuvring their income. Can you put that in one of the 8 or 10 categories now for child support?
Does the family court care if there is a child support lack of payment? Does the family court looks like what are the repercussions if you're in family court and they see there's a child support debt?
Well, that's terrible. That's going to give you in property settlement. It'll make them inclined, because past behaviour indicates future behaviour, to give the mother an extra share of the property because of the father's dilatory behaviour in paying his child support. However, hands up everyone who have found that their child support arrears are miraculously paid 2 or 3 days before court, so that they can say to the judge, oh no, they're paid. And the court's not silly. They see this over and over and over again. So it forms, like, from the point of view of who's got the children's best interests at heart, it's a big negative if a person is not paying in their child support. So it is going to come into play for when they're deciding where the children should live, who should spend what time with the children. They are going to see that as not paying child support as a big negative against the person who should be paying. So you'll see that is pretty quickly pointed out in any court proceeding.
And if you are desperate, you can go also for urgent spousal maintenance or alimony.
So there's urgent spousal maintenance claim is one. If you've got, and for goodness sake, check your insurances regularly, because if they say they're paying it and they don't, you could get into a lot of bother because if your medical insurance, for instance, lapses. But if you've got urgent need, you can apply to the court for an urgent spousal maintenance claim under Section 77 of the Family Law Act. And the court doesn't have to see if that person can afford it. You just have to show that you had this urgent debt and it has to be paid. The court will order it. If you make a case, order it to be paid. And then they're not obliged to see if he can afford it. If there was a history of him paying things, and then they can make that order. And then you will have an interim court order. That'll be your next one, will be an interim court order for spousal maintenance. So child support has to stay in Australia in the Child Support Agency, right through the reviews, right through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and only gets before a court if those sort of plans have changed, those things have changed.
So another wedge in the wheel, there's it's interesting. It's either or. It's either endangering the children or disregarding the children. So disregarding the children says ignoring school schedules, homework, ridiculing their needs, their wants, their identities, forcing their family members, new girlfriends or wives and other women to do the parenting work, treating them as younger or older than they are, and enforcing strict gender roles. I've never heard.
My jaw just hit the floor.
I know someone's actually put that in writing.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, in a way, that's a positive that's being recognised. But, Mum, does that get looked at?
Yes, and it didn't used to, I think, but now you can say that the best interests of the children need for them to be stable, for them to not be treated as older than they are, for instance, not be stuck on this schedule, that the power and control, sometimes they will move it from their ex onto one of the children and use that coercive control. And of course they engage allies like their new girlfriends and other members of your friendship group to also, I guess, support them in caring for the kids. They'll drop the kids off at a girlfriend's place or they drop them off at the parents' place. And it's not about having the children themselves. It's about stopping the mother from having the children.
I'm sure we've talked about this before, and you said the court doesn't actually do anything about that.
However, since the 6th of May, it is a relevant consideration. Okay?
Right.
All of the things are. The court's able to look at everything and they're not starting from a presumption.
But how do you find out? So do the children tell you and then what, you just document it and wait until court to let them know, or do you address this issue with them? Like, it's hard to know what the best...
It's hard to raise some of those things without sounding petty. Yes. And it might need to come from a social worker or a psychologist.
Would it come out in a family report?
It may do, but the children may not actually identify it as inappropriate. Okay. Mm-hmm. They might have occasional whinges. And of course, our listeners aren't going to ask the kids what's going on over there, but you will hear things. You will hear things about how things went, and you can put those down in a document, and hopefully the family report writer will, or the family consultant will identify those things. That endangering children.
That's the next stage. Yeah. Lefting them when they're with them, putting them in age inappropriate emotional, physical situations, and using violence in front of the children.
Everybody knows that sort of what that means. I think we don't need to expand on that.
Could you take the children to the police? Like, if your child comes back and tells you that, do you just sit back and wait for the family court to do something, or should you go to the police?
Well, if they're being neglected or being put in age inappropriate emotional, physical things, or using violence in front of the children, I think your first step is to work out whether they should be spending time with the father or not. Okay. If you've got a court order, you might not be in a position to, flout that court order or break that court order, but you can record what happens, document it. The violence, of course, is something that the police can be told about. But we all know there's such subtle things. It's weird, but generally it's just they don't have the children's welfare at heart. They have hurting the mother at heart.
Okay, and then that gets on to the next one, which is disrupting her relationship with the children. So coercing them to ally with him, degrading her to them, using the children as spies, isolating the children from her. I know the term alienation is being used probably too much, but there is that element of, and we've got an episode called Trash Talking and what you can do about it. And it is hard, I'd say, for anyone if their child comes back and says, Daddy said this about you, or Mummy said this about you, or, you've left Mum no money, or you've left Dad no money, and involving the children in the drama is so emotionally damaging for the children. But is that something they just have to document and let the court know as well?
Well, it's so hard, isn't it? Because they do have to let the court know those things. It may be that the kids buy into the program that their father is running, And you might need to put your side of the story so that they can see what's happened to the children from your point of view. It's really hard. It's really hard when the trash talking happens in the other house and you feel you can't respond because then you're putting the children in the middle of the dispute. And then for a short term, the person who's putting all that on them would appear to be successful, I guess, in damaging the mother-child relationship. But in doing so, they are demonstrating that they don't put the children's needs first. No decent human being would do that to kids. I think, though, that's where the legislation that from 2016 2006 until just a few weeks ago, that presumption of 50-50 shared care, many men used that to damage the children, discredit the mother. And when they did the Australian Law Reform Commission received submissions that I can't remember who put the submission in, but they said that something like 70% of the men seeking equal time with the children were guided or did it for financial reasons, for child support and for property settlement. If you had the children, as often as the wife had the children, a mother had the children, for instance, then there'd be no adjustment to the mother for having the care of the children for a longer time. And with child support, as you know, it works on nights. So the more they could have the kids in their care, even if they just stuck them with an iPad and put them in their rooms, it was still saving them money in terms of what they had to pay for child support.
I think the last one on there, which is self-explanatory, is using physical and sexual violence against the mother and the children, threatening to kill or kidnap them, physically hurting her, abusing them sexually, emotionally, threatening suicide, forcing sex as a condition, and exposing children to pornography. Again, if this is triggering you, please, you can call 13 11 14, which is Lifeline, or you can call 1-800-RESPECT. And if any of this is happening, you should call 000 and speak to your local police. But that kind of behaviour, 100% you need to get a protection order and a safety plan in place. And that's what the book, the Purple Book, which I strongly recommend if anyone is experiencing this to download, it has safety planning considerations after you've left. So it gives you a list of the things that you need to consider moving forwards. There's accommodation options that you can look into. It talks about the legal protections. It talks about protection orders. It talks about breaching the orders, but it also talks about taking care of yourself emotionally. And it's just some of the feelings people experience once they've left and they're dealing with this kind of stuff is grief, euphoria, anger, anxiety, and loneliness. That is like a whole gamut that's like why is euphoria in there? It says women may experience a sense of euphoria that could last for a few weeks or months after leaving.
I can tell you why. It's relief. It's like being born again. If you suddenly have your own money, you're not dealing with sort of someone grumpy and critical in the house for a while. It's the relief. It's the massive relief.
But it does say then it can be followed by anger or depression due to new challenges experienced, because it is sometimes not told to people. They say, get out, but they don't talk about this abuse that continues after separation. So there's some really great tips in there on how to continue to take care of yourself. I really, really strongly recommend anybody to go to this. It's got amazing links to help anybody going through this, whether you're in another country or not. You can at least have a look at it. But, Mum, I think when it comes to post-separation abuse, and we have done a 2-part episode where we've gone in depth into another model and we've talked about it. And I've just mentioned a lot of episodes that just deal with just one wedge of those each, that you may go into the show notes, go to thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog, find this episode, then go to the show notes, get the link for the episodes that we talked about that are relevant to you. But I feel like this is even though that was just absolutely horrific to read, I feel like this is giving hope in a way that people are noticing. People are aware that this is happening, that it's in a book. Someone's written it down and they've printed it out and they're handing it out at places. So that's a very good sign that you're not alone and that it is recognized behavior. But when it comes down to legally showing it, you can't just go, he does this, this, and this, and this. You have to say, he did this on this date. He did this on this date. And the best way you can do that is listen to our record keeping episode, or you can download that ARC app, which I think is amazing. And I'll put the links to that in the show note as well. I'm not aware if it's on Android, but if you can have a look at that, I think that would be the best for you. Now, what is your mum talk for anybody listening today who is probably just, if they're listening to this, are going through a pretty rough trot?
Yeah. Well, my dears, this is the first time in history of the family court that coercive control has been properly recognised. And the things that are in that will, you can say those things with confidence now because you will be believed. You set your dates, what happened, and you will be believed. This is an absolute watershed. And if you haven't had your court appearance, or if you haven't had your final trial, then coercive control is going to be taken into account. And this is the first time I've seen such a substantial list, I guess, of the actions that can be taken against a mother and the children that are actually coercive control. You know, only a couple of months ago, I saw an affidavit from someone where the father listed all of the things that he had called the wife, the mother, during the marriage. And it was completely disregarded by the court because he was just, but I never hit her, he said. Now, if he were to list those things again, or if the matter was coming up for trial now, the court will see that for what it is. So coercive control, you know, it's not like, here's my bruise or here's my broken bone. But I think it's been recognised now as something that you need to be protected from. Yeah. You need to recover from.
And this is a pattern of behaviour. These are patterns. Again, individually, if you rang up the police or went and spoke to the police about one thing, he ripped the bag apart of the school bag, they're going to go, you know what, so what? So in that purple book that we've talked about, it talks about showing patterns of abuse, and it's talking about the logging of it. So it says actions. How would you describe what happened? What was happening prior to what they did to you? What statements did they make? What gestures did they use? How would you describe their tone of voice? What was their facial expressions like? Then intent. What did they think you wanted? What do you think they wanted to make happen? Did they want to stop you from doing or saying something? Did they want to make you do or say something? Beliefs. What did you think they believe or think that supports them to be okay with what they did to you? What thinking gave them self-permission to do what they did to you? And then impact and effect is really important. What was the impact of what they did to you? What is the impact of what they did to others who were there if children were in the room? What is the impact on the person who did this to you? And what is the impact of the relationship from what they did to you? And there are so many things in this book that will be really helpful to you. I know it is a hard thing to be dealing with the trauma of maybe, I don't know, just the simple thing that have happened one day where you find out they've gone and, I don't know, undermined you as a mother somehow, or they've gone and stopped payments so you're being financially abused. The last thing you're going to want to do is document it. But in this day and age, if you've got irrefutable proof and a lodge of the thing, and if you want to use the ARC app, it will collate it as a report and it'll show, are you feeling safe or unsafe? Was it emotional, physical, all of that. So it is a really good app to use. Again, we're not liable for what choice or decisions you make. We're just trying to educate. But I think document.
Write it down. Absolutely. Also, Laura, I think sometimes if you start to doubt yourself, if they are calling you names or if they're alleging things and you think, oh, am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Am I doing that? You need it written down so you can look back over it and go, oh, no, actually, no, this was all, it really happened. And they're the ones who minimizing it and just trying to make it like it was normal.
And that minimizing, denying and blaming. So does your partner blame you for their anger and violence, saying it was your fault? That's not good. That's a tick in the red flag box. Does your partner say that you are asking for it? Does your partner deny using violence afterwards and say it was all made up? And does your partner say that it wasn't that bad? So that kind of stuff is part of the power and control and pattern of abuse. So really write it down and reality check.
And can I recommend to our listeners, Jess Hill, Jess Hill, Hill. She's written extensively on coercive control, and I think it's thanks in a very large part to her work that this concept of coercive control has been, taken on board by people and the court. And it is the most dangerous form of abuse. So be careful.
We are, Jess Hill's book is...
Yes, See What You Made Me Do.
SBS show as well. I think we'll put links to those in the show notes as well.
Yep.
We're not trying to scare you. What we're trying to do is trying to prepare you. So go and have a look on our website, thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog. You can look at the post-separation abuse. We've got a whole bunch of episodes on it. I just wanted to raise awareness to this purple book. I'm absolutely gobsmacked that it's written in words. I'm happy that it's being named, and that's the start. Yeah. That's the start, isn't it, Mum?
Yeah, it is. It is.
So
it absolutely
you are not alone, and there are others that have gotten through this, and there are others that are going through this, and there are people out there who will help you. And the best number you can call is 1-800-RESPECT, and get your lawyer across this. And if your lawyer doesn't know about this kind of stuff, give them the purple book. And then that hopefully the lawyer can get a better head around this post-separation abuse. But Mum, I want to thank you for your time. And again, anyone, if this has triggered you, please, you can call Lifeline 13 11 14. And of course, we're always here for you guys. If there's anything you'd like us to discuss in a podcast episode, if you want to recommend anything to us that you've heard of that's working really well, you can send us an email at thedivorcecourspodcast@gmail.com.
Bye, Laura. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mum. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording.